In this video, I'm going to break down exactly how you can approach your first 90 days if you were just hired as a head of growth at a new company. This is the former plan that I created. When I was head of growth for the first time at Wistia, I was promoted from within. So I didn't really need a plan. I just started doing the job. But when I switched companies and I got my second head of growth job, I realized that I needed to show up with a plan. I needed to organize my thoughts. I needed to get off to a fast start. And I wanted to make sure that I was aligned with my cross-functional stakeholders. So this is the plan that I made. I have shared it with a ton of my coaching clients who have gone through transitions. They have found it extremely helpful. So I'm sharing this video in hopes that if you're watching it, maybe you'll find it helpful too. Now there's 3 important notes before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this plan. The first is who this is designed for. This framework that I'm about to share is specifically designed for people who are leading cross-functional growth teams at product-led SaaS businesses, or people within a few degrees of magnitude of that. So if your title is head of growth, director of growth, VP of growth, or even sometimes growth marketers and growth PMs, this is going to be for you. It is specifically designed for people that are in your jobs in these weird cross-functional roles that are still relatively new and ill-defined. That's why we need our own plan, right? This is a new capability, and if we don't come up with a plan, we may be stuck, misaligned, and headed in the wrong direction. The second is, when do you create this plan? Now, I always advocate for showing up to a new role with your own plan on the first day when you show up to work. So if you're watching this video and you've already started your new job, it's not too late. Just the sooner you can do it, the better. And the reason why that's so important is because what I have found is if you don't show up with your own onboarding plan, some executive or manager is going to do it for you. And for most of us, our managers haven't had our job before if you work in growth. And so your manager, with the best of intentions, might have actually created a plan for you that may not actually be the right plan for you to show up and have a big impact quickly. And so that's why you need your own plan. And the sooner you can do it, the more effective you're going to be. The third is, if you want to go deeper on this, right? This is going to be a relatively short video, but if you want to go deeper, I would advocate buying a fantastic book, which is called The First 90 Days. I'll put a link to it in the notes below or maybe above here. And essentially what I've done is I read this book and adapted the entire book to the plan here, which is designed for people like us who work in growth in these cross-functional roles at early stage product-led SaaS businesses. So if you want to go deeper, buy that book. Otherwise, let's go ahead and dive into the plan. And what we're going to do is organize our plan into 3 distinct stages. The first is going to be your first 30 days. So from your first day of work to the end of the first month. The second phase is going to be day 30 through 60. And the third stage is going to be days 60 through 90. Now, as we go, what you're going to notice is the plan is purposely more detailed and prescriptive during the first 30 days and is going to become less prescriptive and detailed over time, right? You're going to naturally start to revise this and customize it based on your exact company and what you learn and the company's operating system. And so we always want to start being prescriptive and then be more adaptable as time goes on. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So let's double click on your first 30 days. So here's the top priorities that I would advocate for in your first 30 days in a new growth role. The first is going to be putting together a learning roadmap. Essentially what you want to do is show up with a predefined list of all the things that you're going to want to learn so that you can be successful later. If you're working on a cross-functional growth team, there's a ton that you need to understand about the business. And so if you don't predefine it, you're probably not going to learn it all, or you're going to learn it piecemeal, and it's going to feel disorganized, and it's not going to be something that you can turn into a strategy later. So here's the specific things that I would put on your learning roadmap. There's going to be 2 parts to it. One is going to be company fundamentals, and the second is going to be the company operating system. So when we think about company fundamentals, these are the building blocks for future growth work. So some specific things that I would advocate for are understanding the company mission and vision and existing strategy, right? That's going to be step number 1 would be to acquire that information. You're also going to want to understand the competitive landscape and the major players that are in the space and how you differentiate against those. You'll also want to understand the target customer. Their personas might be helpful, but in growth, typically it's more helpful to understand their jobs to be done, the conversion levers and the conversion blockers. Why do people buy your product and what stops them from buying it? You also want to use the product as much as humanly possible to build on the company fundamentals, right? Get in there, go through the onboarding flow, pull out your credit card and swipe it, become a customer, go through the cancellation process. You want to really get in there, and probably what you'll find is some quick wins along the way. You can write those down and add them to your notes for later. But the more you can learn about the product, the more successful you're going to be down the road. Now, the last part of the company fundamentals is to really get into the existing growth model. You want to understand it qualitatively and quantitatively. So on the qualitative side, you really just want to understand, how does the company grow? How are users acquired? How are they activated? How are they retained? And how are they converted? So you want to create a qualitative version of the model, and then obviously dig into the quantitative side to understand both the volume and the conversion rates. So the second thing that you're going to want on your learning roadmap is going to be the company operating system. Now, this is kind of a fancy way of saying how the work gets done at this company. At every company, work gets done differently. There are different cultural norms, different standard operating procedures, and the quicker you can learn that stuff, the faster you're going to be successful as you get started. Now, a quick caveat, right? If you're being hired to build and lead a cross-functional growth team, you're being hired to implement your own systems. But in the short run, this is going to help you slide in seamlessly into their current ways of operating. So when you find quick wins and little one-off projects, you can get those done and start building momentum fast. So specific things that I would advocate within the company operating system would be any relevant sprint cycles. Like, does marketing and product today work on a sprint cycle? If so, when do they meet? What are the core parts of it? What tools do they use? What are the key meetings and stakeholders when it comes to executing work and making major strategic decisions? What are the project management tools and how are those used? And then just really any communication and documentation norms. At every company, there's a balance between speed and rigor. And the more you can understand which of those your company prioritizes, the easier it's going to be for you to slide in and start to build some momentum. And the final part of the company operating system is going to be the existing tech stack. So what's being used on the marketing and product side today, and so you can get into that stuff and know what you have access to. So in addition to the learning roadmap, that's going to be priority number 1 during your first 30 days. Priority number 2 is going to be connecting with new teammates. Now, don't roll your eyes or fast forward this part. I'm not just talking about how to get to know people, but really what I'm advocating for is exploring 2 parts to this. The first is starting to align. So asking your new teammates, your cross-functional stakeholders and peers, do they understand your role? What do they think your role has ownership and accountability for? That's what I want to spend time chatting about with my new teammates. I also want to spend time learning about what decisions they want to be included in. I don't want to step on any cultural landmines during my first 30 days. And so the nicer I can play with my peers, the more successful future me is going to be. And the third thing that I want to talk to my new teammates about is any ideas they have for me. Typically what I find is when a company finally hires a growth leader, there is a long backlog of pet rock projects that have been shelved or blocked for whatever reason. You want to unearth all of those projects and you want to add them to your backlog. You don't have to commit to anything. You just want to understand what they are so you can start to, again, build up that backlog of high impact ideas. And when you're new, they're not going to come from you because you're still in the learning stage. They'll typically come from other folks. After connecting with teammates, the next priority, number 3, is going to be starting to align on your role and responsibilities. Growth roles tend to be undefined. A head of growth could mean 10 different things at 10 different companies. So your job is to create your own goals, milestones, and roadmaps, and then eventually start to communicate them to your internal stakeholders for alignment. That is the process of starting to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So you want to start this, right? As you are getting going during these first 30 days, you're going to want to start to brainstorm. What are the goals that you have? What are the milestones that you see as stepping stones to get to those goals and those outcomes? And what might be the loose roadmap that you would do, the order of operations to achieve those things? And then you want to be sharing them proactively with your internal stakeholders and execs above you. Because if there is misalignment, you want to identify it early before you get going. You want to gain consensus. So show them this plan. If you've got your 90-day plan, review your goals and KPIs together and discuss the vision for your role to make sure that you're on the same page. Now, the fourth priority during those first 30 days is that you want to start to get some early wins. You want to start building momentum. You want to start getting excitement. You want to start sharing at show and tell. You want to start being able to show people some of the impact that you've had as quickly as possible. So you want to start executing on those quick wins. You want to let everybody know that they're quick wins and that your job isn't only to execute quick wins. But I think the sooner you get some W's on the board, the easier it's going to be to take on those big projects down the road. So that's how I'd approach the first 30 days. Days 30 through 60 are where you can begin to develop a ton of trust by ensuring that everyone at your new company understands what you're going to be focused on, why, and how you get the work done. So your goal is to essentially develop a plan that has specific goals and outcomes to drive growth, and then to begin to identify and acquire the tools and resources and systems to execute on that plan at your company. There's two important artifacts here that I found enable this to become reality. The first is creating a first version of your strategy. Now, the specific things, you're still new, so the specific things I would include would be to highlight some high-level growth goals. I would include a few levers that you want to pull within the growth model to achieve those growth goals. And then I would brainstorm a bunch of tactical projects, programs, or experiments that will help you make progress on pulling those levers within the growth model. So goal, strategies, tactics. I would define a loose roadmap, essentially the order of operations. What are you going to prioritize first? Are you going to do a mix of long-term projects and short-term projects? If so, what does it look like? So a roadmap. Some milestones, which are essentially you letting everyone know, here's what success looks like, here's the KPIs that I'm going to present on down the road, and here's when we should be looking at that data. You want to define your resource needs and then any potential threats to your plan. When I think about threats, I think about if I'm unsuccessful with my growth strategy, what are the most likely reasons why? They could be things about the market. For example, if a competitor gets a huge round of funding, that could be a major threat. If there is lack of product market fit, that would be a threat. And obviously, if your assumptions are incorrect, those might be threats as well. You want to predefine those so that as you go, if you're not making progress, you can look at your threats, potentially adjust your plan as you go. The second artifact is something that I call a growth operations manual. Now, we talked about in days 1 through 30, learning about the existing company operating system. But here's where you want to define your own operating system. Growth teams work differently than the rest of the company. And so if you don't define exactly how you want your growth team to look and to operate, it's going to always feel like your team is disrupting or annoying or competing with other teams at the company. So the way to do this is to get it all out of your head and on paper into this growth operations manual. I like to include team structure today and in the future. So who's on the growth team? How do they sit together? How do they work together? Who do they report to? Is it an independent team? Is it a hybrid model? Whatever it looks like today. And then what does it look like down the road in 12 to 18 months' time? What does your growth team look like? Has it scaled? If so, which parts of the team have you filled in the gaps for? The second thing in your growth operations manual are your operating principles. Think about these as ways that you want your team to make decisions when you're not around. What do you want them to prioritize? If there's something competing for their attention, which should be fed first? Should they prioritize speed versus rigor? Is it learning versus winning? Is it trailblazing and having small scope to validate larger term opportunities? Right? I'm brainstorming. Those are all things that have been in my operating system and in key operating principles for my teams in the past. You want to define what yours are, so that when you're not around, your team can use that to make decisions. And if you ever have to crack a few eggs, meaning if you're ever working in growth and you have to step on another team's toes, you can point to your operating system as a tool in your belt to help you with influencing that other team. The third thing in your operations manual is going to be your key processes. Right? Growth teams work differently than other teams. We've got different systems for brainstorming. We might want to define cross-functional peers to be involved in our brainstorms. We might want to let other teams know how we prioritize using an ICE framework or something similar. And we certainly want to let them know how we experiment. Do we have specific documentation there? I have in the past, and I would advocate for that. If so, you want to let folks know exactly what a good experiment doc looks like. What does it include? What are the sections? How do you think about winners? Statistical significance, all that kind of stuff. You want to define those operating processes. The next thing in your growth operations manual are going to be the specific growth KPIs that are going to be in your scorecard. Obviously, you've got specific KPIs that you've set goals against, but you're probably also going to have other KPIs that you're tracking within the growth model. You want to define those. And then the last piece of this puzzle is how you collaborate with other teams. Now, there's many different ways how you could define how you want to collaborate with other teams. I would advocate for creating a RACI matrix, something that defines for each area of the growth model, both in terms of outcomes, like in terms of the KPIs, and in terms of the ownership area. So for example, if we take acquisition, who is ultimately responsible for the number of new signups, whether it's a free account or a free trial? And if so, who's the person who's going to be responsible for the website versus the landing page versus, let's say it's a free product, we're talking about the virality loops. And so if you can define the different parts of the growth model, both in terms of KPIs and in terms of surface area. It's going to make future you much, much happier when it comes time to execute and to figure out who you need to collaborate with. So create a RACI matrix, add that as the last piece to your operations manual. Those are the two artifacts that I find incredibly helpful. First version of your strategy, operations manual, and then the third priority during days 30 through 60 would be to start shipping. All right, so days 60 through 90, right? 60 days at a startup is a pretty long time. So this part of the plan is intentionally less defined. Your goal is to continue gaining momentum, start forming opinions based on what's working and what's not working, and then iterate on your plan as you gain more confidence. So you've got three main priorities during this time period. The first is going to be continuing to execute on your growth roadmap. It's going to take you a few months until you get into a good rhythm for how to operate at this new company. Use this time to get better at executing and learning about the potential impact that you can make. The second priority is going to be to update your strategy based on what you've learned, right? We talked about the goal of the first version of your strategy and roadmap is really to take your best guess about where to focus your time and your energy. It's totally okay to be wrong. You will be wrong. But what you want to do is to revise your roadmap and then refocus and retool. So block aside time on your calendar so that you can do this intentionally, so you can gather what's learning and revisit your approach. Your third priority during this time period is going to be to refine your growth model and your growth dashboards. As you continue to make progress on your roadmap, you're going to identify new KPIs that you want to track, new opportunities to optimize or enhance your growth roadmap, and things that are going to help you. And so you want to continue to refine and iterate as time goes on. Okay, so at this point, we've got our onboarding plan. We've talked about how to approach your first 30 days and how to get off to a fast start. We talked about days 30 through 60 and the two most important artifacts to create there, your strategy and your operating system. And we've talked about the reflection and iteration that should be happening during days 60 through 90. You've got the tools to show up on day one with a badass plan, and I hope that you do. Because if you show up with this plan and you show it to your new team and your new peers and your new boss, you're going to knock their socks off, because this is more than what 90% of new hires do. Most people show up and they just wait for somebody to assign them a plan, but you're not most people. You got your own plan. So take this and run with it. If you need help, there are two ways that I can help you. One is I have an interactive workbook taking you through this exact approach that we talked about today. It's a paint by numbers version of this video. The second way is if you need one-on-one support. I primarily work as a coach and as a mentor to people who work on growth teams. So if you need support, deliveringvalue.co/coaching. And if you want a workbook and to do it on your own, I'll put a link to that in the notes as well. You've got all the tools to show up and crush it on day one, and I hope that you do.